Even the skeptical New Testament critic Gert Ludemann therefore concludes, and I quote, "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." Finally, fact number 5. The original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that Jesus was risen from the dead despite every predisposition to the contrary. Think of the situation the disciples faced following Jesus' crucifixion. Number 1, their leader was dead, and Jewish messianic expectations had no idea of a Messiah who, instead of triumphing over Israel's enemies, would be shamefully executed by them as a criminal. As Shabir Ali himself has put it, for a Jew, the idea of a crucified Messiah is as inconceivable as a married bachelor. 2, according to Old Testament law, Jesus' crucifixion exposed him as a heretic, a man literally accursed by God. According to the law of Moses, anyone who is hanged on a tree as a criminal is under God's curse. The Jews also applied this law to anyone who was crucified as Jesus was. And 3, Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anyone's rising from the dead to glory and immortality before the general resurrection at the end of the world. Nevertheless, the original disciples suddenly came to believe so strongly that God had raised Jesus from the dead that they were willing to go to their deaths for the truth of that belief. Luke Johnson states, "Some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was." And N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, "That is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him." In summary, then, there are 5 facts which are agreed upon today by the majority of scholars who have written on the subject: Jesus' trial and crucifixion, his burial by Joseph of Arimathea, the discovery of his empty tomb, his post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' belief in his resurrection. And thus the majority of scholars would agree with my first contention this evening. But that leads to my second basic contention, that the best explanation of these facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead. In his book, Justifying Historical Descriptions, historian C.B. McCullough lists 6 tests which historians use in determining what is the best explanation for given historical facts. The hypothesis, God raised Jesus from the dead, passes all 6 of these tests. Number 1, it has great explanatory scope. It explains why the tomb was found empty, why the disciples saw post-mortem appearances of Jesus, and why the Christian faith came into being. Number 2, it has great explanatory power. It explains why the body of Jesus was gone, why people repeatedly saw Jesus alive, despite his earlier public execution, and so forth. 3, it is plausible. Given the historical context of Jesus' own unparalleled life and claims, the resurrection serves as divine vindication of those claims. 4, it is not ad hoc or contrived. It requires only one additional hypothesis, that God exists. And even that needn't be an additional hypothesis if you already believe in God's existence, as Shabir and I do. 5, it is in accord with accepted beliefs. The hypothesis, God raised Jesus from the dead, does not in any way conflict with the accepted belief that people don't rise naturally from the dead. The Christian accepts that belief as wholeheartedly as he accepts the belief that God raised Jesus from the dead. And number 6, it far outstrips any of its rival hypotheses in meeting conditions 1 to 5. Down through history, various alternative explanations of the facts have been offered. For example, the conspiracy theory, the apparent death theory, the hallucination theory, and so forth. Such hypotheses have been almost universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. No naturalistic hypothesis has attracted a great number of scholars. So on this basis, it seems to me that we should conclude that the best explanation of the evidence is the one that the original disciples themselves gave. Namely, God raised Jesus from the dead.